Simon Lekias is one of Australia's top fashion photographers. He's worked in the industry now for nearly 3 decades, photographing in some of the most exotic locations in the world with some of the most beautiful people in the world for the high-end brands. I think if you enjoy fashion or photography or image capturing of any sort, I think this podcast is for you. Out of your busy schedule, thank you so much for coming on. How long are you here in Perth for?
Oh, thanks for having me, Wayne. It's great to be here. It's great to meet you too.
Yeah, you too.
I'm here for about a week. Just crossed over with a bit of school holidays and an assignment. Brought me back to Perth. It was the last time I was here about a couple of months ago. Went up on a fishing trip up to Shark Bay, which was great. But I was in and out a couple of days, so I'm really getting to spend some time with family and friends here.
Because you're from Perth.
I am, yeah. I left in '93, about 30 years ago, but I still feel this thing,
as that Perth people.
Yeah, that's right. It's I come back. Pre-COVID, I was coming back at least 3 or 4 times a year, and when I sort of look back at it, that time where the borders were closed, it was the longest period I hadn't actually been to Perth in the 30 years that I was away.
Okay.
So it was disconcerting. It was really tough.
Are your folks still here?
I lost Dad in 2014 and Mum quite suddenly in tail end of 2019, just before COVID. So there was that period of time where, very early on, when we got locked out of, borders shut, where I couldn't get back here to see family and spend time with my sisters and stuff. So it was pretty, that first 6 months was pretty tough, but it's good to be back. It's great to be back. I love it.
Yeah. Do you think, Simon, that you'll eventually come back, or Sydney is now your home?
It's a good question, and having been on this job with these wonderful people over the last couple of days, I've met a bunch of great producers and logistics people and assistants on this job, and everyone's just so hardworking, but they've all spent time somewhere else, and a couple of the guys that we were talking with have come back, after a 10-year stint in London or whatever it is, and we talked about that, that question, and I think there is a time where you're kind of like, when does it become moving to Perth as opposed to moving back to Perth? Because it's changed so much, and all of my friends have either gone away or they're downsizing or they're doing something else. So a lot of my good friends, they're busy, and I don't get to see them that much, even when I do come to Perth. And the network that we have in Sydney and my daughter's friends and all that, it makes it a bit trickier. But the short answer is I absolutely could see myself being back here at some point, because it's just there's a pull, and there absolutely is, and it's still alive in me, the idea of coming back here, because it's as a place, after having traveled pretty much for 2 decades straight.
Wow.
It's hard to beat. It really is.
And I've got so many questions, because those who know me know how much I love photography. I did photography for quite a while. I actually had another young gentleman who's Vietnamese, who shoots some pretty amazing stuff, but it was a language barrier, and he was like, I know, but if it's a podcast, I know it's a voice thing, and he got too nervous about it. So that sort of came and went. And I thought, I had these questions I wanted to ask, and finally I get to ask them, But is there a time in your past as a kid? And I remember seeing a photo of you as a child with a camera around your on your chest, and all, amongst all these tall adults. Was there a time in your past where you either took a photo or you saw a photo that inspired you to sort of go, wow?
I can isolate that moment.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I'll tell you what happened. I ended up in the dark room at West Australia, at the Sunday Times dark room. One of my friend's dads was friends with one of the sports journalists up there, and he took us, me and my friends, up to the darkroom
Sure.
or into the photographic facility, gave us a tour, and the first time I actually saw emulsion react to developer was actually when I put my hand underneath the enlarger and I flashed it off onto a piece of photographic paper and then developed the outline of my hand. That was really the first time I ever made a photograph, which I think I still have in a box
Oh, yeah.
somewhere. Yeah, I would have been about 8,
Right. Right.
and it was magic. It was like making something out of nothing, and it was just fantastic. And I think at that point, something definitely clicked, or a switch or a light, something
In
switched
you,
in
that you
me.
knew.
And you know, there was that moment, which I think was you know, a pivotal moment in my journey, my photographic journey. And then that sort of gave me a great interest in photography. So whenever I would look at a photograph or a series of photographs, my father spent a lot of time in the early 60s traveling through Canada and the sort of the outer reaches of the Arctic Circle,
Wow.
working for the American Air Force, building early warning systems up there.
Really?
You know,
Wow,
it
that's
was like, yeah,
interesting.
it was like a FIFO thing up there, and he left Perth in the late 50s and stayed away till about 1963. And he was up there, and I've still got all his Kodachrome slides that he shot up from up there. And you know, we would have these slide nights where he would play us these, you know, show us these pictures of his adventures and his journey, and you know, it was just this magical world that
Wow.
it just sort of opened up. And you know, I think back and I visualize what that experience was, and I can just imagine how I looked. I was just this sort of starry-eyed 4-year-old kid just staring at
I
these
bet.
projected images of my dad as a younger man, you know, in the Arctic Circle, and you know, surrounded by all these incredible people and places. And you know, he would do these you know, they'd do these swings, 3-week swings up there, and then he would just go and spend 3 weeks in Vegas or 3 weeks in New York. And so I've got these incredible Kodachrome slides from or transparencies from, you know, Times Square in 1959, and you know, all these amazing
Wow.
pictures which I've preserved and are now archived properly, because they were sort of floating around in, you know, boxes and stuff for a while. But yeah, so I've made a nice edit of those. I'll do something with them one day. I'm not sure whether it'll be like a little show or a little book, but I think they deserve to be out
I
there
think so.
because they're really beautiful
Even for your
things.
kids
Yeah, yeah.
to look at, you
So
know.
so there was always these photographic touch points in my
Right.
life, and that picture that you're referring to, when I think I was about 11, and I went on a trip to Greece with my mum and dad, and I just to digress, when I was born, um, the the obstetrician who was a family friend gave my father and mother a subscription to National Geographic, uh, right as a birthday present to me. So I was getting National Geographic magazines from the date I was born.
Right.
Uh, so, you know, the National Geographic magazine is the shape of a 35 mil,
Of
you know,
course.
and so I would always, the first thing that I would look at was the ad on the back, because it was always the latest camera. Um, that was the first thing. And then I would, you know, have a look. But in 1981, when I first got my first proper SLR, it was the Minolta XD7. That's the camera that's around my neck in that picture.
Right.
And I took it for a whirl in Greece. Still have those pictures, and they're fantastic. It was just, you know, this kid's view of what was going on. You know, landing in Athens for the first time in my conscious memory. I had been to Greece prior to that, but I don't remember it.
So you were
But
born in Greece?
no, I was born here,
Oh,
but
okay.
we all went over as a family when we were all quite young, and um, but this is the first time I really sort of took a camera out into the street and sort of started making pictures of what was interesting to me. And yeah, and that camera it still holds up today if you
Mm.
can find one, they're probably 20 grand now. I don't know, but
Oh God,
the
yeah.
film cameras have gone through the roof. But yeah, so that was, I look back and all these moments are so pivotal because there was always something, I was touching photography in some way
Mm.
from a very young age. And even if I would sort of put it into the sort of background of, what I thought I needed to be doing in life,
Yeah.
growing up in Perth, there was a certain thing expected in terms of what there
Sure.
was
Especially then.
creativity wasn't something
Yeah.
that was sort of encouraged as a means.
I think so. I think
Yeah,
that's why a lot of people left and
yeah,
went elsewhere.
yeah,
They had this huge exodus of creatives
yeah.
that went over east and went,
That's
other
right.
places
Yeah,
because of that. I mean, I was one of them and my
yeah,
wife was one of them.
yeah.
Where was your family from in Greece?
Okay, yeah. So, mum came out here in about 1963, I think it was,
Yep.
in I believe it was March or April
Right.
of 1963, and she came from a small village on the mainland of Greece, on the Ionian side,
Yeah.
called Paleros, and dad's side of the dad was born in Perth, but his side of the family came from a small island in the Dodecanese called Castellorizo,
Right.
and they met in 1963. I think they met. Dad had been back for after his travels. He'd been back for a number of months, and Mum arrived, and they met, and they got married. I think 6 months later or something,
Right. Very different back
and
then, wasn't it?
they were married for 52 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so
I look at that, mate, and I think, well, this is my 32nd year
yeah, there you
with
go.
my how quick that has
Yeah,
gone.
yeah.
But one thing I really wanted to ask you, and I've sort of got a bit of a background now, is your surname, Lickias?
Yes.
What is Simon Lickias's style? If you had to define it, what do you think your style is? Why do people look at your photos or hire you as a photographer?
I'd call it freestyle.
Freestyle.
Yeah.
I think I might have read that on
Yeah.
your website.
Yeah. Look, I think, look, I'm always guided by the light. I mean, I know that sounds kind of weird, but it's like light for me has been the one thing that has held the magic for
Sure.
for what I find interesting about photography. Um, one thing that we all have that is unique is a point of view. I mean, and I tell this to a lot of my assistants and people that I ask me about photography in terms of, how do you get to that place where you can even call what you're doing a style? Because it's hard to find.
It is.
But I think it's also one of those things that's kind of right there, and you don't really know until it's sort of it's right under your nose. You can be looking for it, but it's literally right there.
Yeah.
It takes courage, I think, and confidence to be able to express it as a style and to say, this is who I am, and this is what this is what I like to look at, or this is what I find interesting, or this is. I mean, that's all it comes down to at the end of the day.
It does.
It's like it's so subjective, it's so personal, and if I was to sort of find the golden thread that sort of tied all the things that sort of if you looked at a travel image of mine or advertising image of mine or a portrait of mine, the one thing that sort of ties it all together is a disarming kind of relationship with light and with beauty. I find I it's taken a while, but I do meditate on the idea of beauty in all things. Um, and you know, I always think about whenever I'm sort of faced with the challenge of how to make something. People say that I'm good at making things look expensive, um, which is
Which helps the brands, right?
which helps, and it's really interesting because I always think of the pictures that Irving Penn did of cigarette butts.
Oh, okay.
Whenever I'm sort of looking at something and I'm like, okay, I've got to make this look good. That's part of my job,
Yeah.
part of my sort of paid work, not necessarily when I'm sort of roaming around with the camera and I've got the choice of what I want, what I want to shoot and when I want to
Sure.
shoot it. But often, like any sort of commercial um, art project, often we're faced with having to sort of assign our point of views to something that you wouldn't necessarily photo, whether it's a piece of clothing or whatever it might be. But I always think about those pictures of Irving Penn. Like he can make cigarette butts look beautiful.
Mm,
Then there's a relationship to the light and the way we view it, and then lend our point of view to that moment or that object or
yeah,
whatever it is. Then you know you can't. It's hard to define.
it
But
is.
to answer your question, I would say that there's this vibrancy in my work. Um, uh, there's a spirit that I think sort of comes from my relationship with the ocean. I mean, you'll see a lot of work around water and ocean and
I did.
all of that sort of stuff. So, you know, I think I would say that I'm recognized more so for the work that I do on location. Um, uh, Boats, water, sand, Australia. Really,
Yeah.
that's kind of where it all goes.
Is it harder to shoot around? I know in film,
Mm.
don't go near the water, don't go near a lot of sand, but I suppose it's different with imagery, right?
Look,
Logistics wise.
I've always said if you can go to work in bare feet, you've got the right job.
Ah, that's your tagline, Simon, right there. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, often I'll just like even, shooting at Rottnest, the other day, we're all there, sand and, bare feet, sand flying everywhere.
Nice.
There's thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment, but, it all gets, I'm so used to it now, that it's just second nature. Like,
I
I love it.
Because you've done this for so long,
Yeah.
do you find that you are searching for new inspiration in similar locations?
Yeah. Look,
Or has it just become a routine thing, which hopefully it doesn't, because
I think, just touching on, the travel. Sometimes people will ask me, how did you get into it or why? And, I, I
it's
think,
come a bit close.
I think there's a curiosity to, growing up here in Perth, I was sort of influenced by the film that I was watching or the book that I was reading or the music that I was listening to. And that sort of opened up this whole, like it was either, post-punk,
Yeah.
music coming out of England, or it was, the journalism that was coming out of England at the time. I was reading magazines like The Face or ID or those sorts of magazines that were really the cutting edge of popular culture, sort of alternative popular culture. And I wasn't getting any of that sort of feedback from my days in Perth. There was this separate world that I was kind of living in, and then there was the reality of living in what was, late 80s Perth, which was still really good fun, but it was a really conservative place too. And I think there was this sort of curiosity gene that was sort of switched on at some point, probably about 14 or 15, where I was like, I want to see the world. I want to get out of here. Like, not because I didn't like it, but because I acknowledged and could see that there was more out there. And that never went away. That kicked off when I was, 14, 15 years old, and it just got stronger and stronger and stronger. And I think it was that which somehow the camera was the vehicle for
Look, I hear it from all walks of life.
Yeah.
Similar, but the one thing that is common, excuse me, the one thing that is common is that curiosity gene.
Yeah.
I've got friends that just never had that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They didn't want to know. They didn't care.
Yeah.
it's okay if they spent their whole life here, which is fine.
Yeah.
But a lot of the creatives I know, and they still have that curiosity gene. I mean, the reason why I do podcasting is I'm curious. I'm curious about people, their journey. And I think it's important. I think that's what keeps each job that comes your way. Like you said, what can I do with this? Can I make these cigarette butts look expensive with whatever job you go to, But I think it's a lot of your personality too. As in, I do remember reading something about Simon online about personality. Your personality comes through in your shoots. And I think that's very important, right? To allow a model to feel comfortable in your presence.
I think it's everybody. Like one thing I should probably add is that, I come from a restaurant background. My family had restaurants in Perth. So there was always this overarching idea of hospitality in my upbringing, in my life. There was always people at the house, people at the restaurant. And, because my father and mother were great entertainers. If they weren't entertaining people at the restaurant, it'd be, okay, we're closing the restaurant, let's go back to my place, and it'd be like, there's groups of people constantly around. They're the moments that I remember about, growing up here. It's this kind of like really amazing group of people constantly around. So, I do view, I'm very sensitive to the fact that, when I'm in the picture in terms of, when it's my turn on a shoot, like when people are there to shoot with me, it's a big day. They've got the money together, they've got their ideas together, they've got their collections together. It's shoot day is a big day for everybody. They don't want to walk into a cookie cutter situation and sort of think, okay, this guy's just ticking boxes right here, and he's just getting the job done because he's, everything is a moment for the let's call them clients or subjects, people who are there to shoot with me, whether it be a celebrity or whatever it might be. And I'm really conscious of that. So, and I've never really approached my work in a formulaic way. I see every day as a sort of a unique thing. And I was even saying it just the other day. One of the things that I love the most about photography is that you are literally creating something that, and this is true of all sort of creative pursuits, but you create something that wasn't there a moment ago, and then it lives.
It lives beyond
right?
what we do.
Yeah. So they are kind of like, so you do have to give people, you've got to let them in, and that's when you get the best results. And that's when you are able to get a performance or a response, as like only directing. You have to give part of yourself over. You have to let the wall down to give people confidence that they can do the same thing.
Yeah,
and that's what I enjoy about my job. Is I just love being around. I love talking to people. Everyone's different. Everyone has a point of view. And, I'm quite lucky because, the fashion industry over the years, gets a bit of a bum rap, like it's always this kind of like generalized idea of lots of egos and all of that kind of stuff. But you get to a certain place and you're working with really amazing, talented, creative people who don't have time to waste. And most of my experience has been, they're just fantastic. It's just amazing, and, most of the time when you get to, I've been coming on, 30 years for me. So the ego was sort of bashed out of me years ago.
I think in a lot of industries, when you get to the level you're working at now and the top, like the models and things, the ego's gone.
Yeah.
It's normally middle management, climbing that ladder to get where you are.
Yeah.
The ego comes in because you have to constantly prove yourself to clients and prove yourself to, but I think, it's nice to get to that level where ego is not part of it, because I think it's probably the most destructive thing in any creative artist, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, So I do view. I've got some amazing people that I work with, and I'm really close to a lot of them. A lot of people I see almost as family. Some of the people
Yeah.
that I work with, and even including some of my clients I've been working with for some clients I've had for a decade. And you build something together. And there's a really amazing thing to celebrate when you've got a creative connection with someone. And you can have those tough conversations. You can slam down the telephone and have creative disagreements. Are so beautiful in a way.
Because you only get a better product
Because
from
then
that,
you've
right?
got something to show for it at the end. And sometimes it's crap, but most of the time, hopefully, it's amazing, and it's an enriching experience.
There's always that battle though
Yeah.
between I remember doing commercials between what you like and what the client
Yeah,
likes.
yeah.
And look, there would be an ad agency, then me as the photographer, but then that ad agency would be working for a client. So you not only had to please yourself, you had to please the ad agency and please the client at the same time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just got a bit of a nightmare because, there would be 3 different creative opinions on that. I think it's different probably because they know what your style is. That's why they hire you. Right?
Yeah.
So it's a bit different.
Yeah, I think there's also, a lot of the times you like directing, you're constantly solving problems.
Problem.
I'm a meteorologist as much as I am a photographer.
I'm glad it's this problem solving in your level.
Yeah.
Because film is all problem solving.
You've got 30 people looking at you saying, when is the rain going to stop? And I'm like, I don't know. I've got a pretty good idea, but or someone calling you, 10 days before the assignment saying, oh, do you think it's going to rain, or and I'm like, I don't know, but you can produce things, you can be really organized, and you can have everything, organized and produced to a T, but then you do have to leave some of it to instinct, experience, understanding, being sensitive to what people's fears are as well, because like we talked about before the podcast, it's like telling stories is an expensive sport. It's not it's not cheap to get a group of really talented people together to sort of to have this singular vision and produce something that's going to sort of enrich people's experiences of the world, and as artists, creative artists, as well as, or sort of commercial artists, as well as, practicing artists, or any way you want to cut it, we're all at some point sort of coming from a similar place, where we sort of experience this world in a bit of a different way to those who are on this earth to sustain life, like your engineers or your doctors or whatever. It's a different, we're all the same people, but we're kind of our experience of the world is slightly different, and we're all relevant.
Yeah, contributing.
We need to be a part of all of that, and and it's a really interesting thing, and it's a journey that I honestly believe that I do feel like I'm only just getting started. I even this far down, I learn something all the time. And I remember, just talking about light, and, I studied, I used to look at, a lot of, I still look at a lot of paintings, but like, I remember when I first went to New York, and I went into the Met, and I stood in the Rembrandt room. I was the first time I had, I was 22 or something, and I had $7 to my name, and one of the things that I could do was go to the Met, and
the birth of the 3-point lighting system, Rembrandt.
Well, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at these 2 pictures that he painted, and I think there was 40 years between them or something.
God.
And I was looking at them, and I was, they looked similar. Technique was kind of identical, and everything was, and I'm like, why does that one look slightly kind of, why is that one getting me a little bit more? What's going on? I stood in front of these pictures for couple of hours, and I worked out that all it was a dot of white paint that he just changed the shape of the catchlight in the eye. And over 40 years,
there's a catchlight.
That's what he got to. it just changed the shape of the
But
catchlight.
yeah, the feeling came across there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's I'm not comparing anyone to Rembrandt, but I'm just sort of relaying experience as it's happened to me. It's a similar thing in photography, where the difference between your pictures for the next 5 years and the pictures for the following 5 years or the previous 5 years is kind of like 3 feet of where you put that softbox. Oh, if I put it there,
Yeah.
it changes
I
everything,
understand.
and
Yeah.
I like that more. So
Yeah.
we're talking about a game of millimeters that can change your whole experience of the
Mm.
journey, and that's how I see it. So, and I was saying just the other day to someone, a new assistant of mine, because I use a lot of I subtract a lot of light when I'm shooting outside. I'm
Yeah.
taking away a lot of light. I'm
Sure.
actually taking away more light than I need. And then shaping it a certain way.
Yeah.
Um, and and those sorts of the way you can push light around and shape light. That's what's keeping me primed. That's what's keeping me really curious and um, fresh in the way I wake up and go, yeah. And people always ask, are you still passionate about it? Do you still like doing? I'm like, oh, I don't. It's like I said, it's like it's like asking someone if you like breathing. I wouldn't want to do anything else, and because it's light. It's
Yeah.
it's all it is. It's the way we apply. It's the way we apply all these things to tell our story, or to sort of relay our point of view.
Sure. It is nice to hear, because you get from different photographers. Like, I remember a young guy who's a professional photographer in I think he's in Brooklyn. His name is Joey Lawrence,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he was talking about highlights. And he said, I don't use square soft boxes because they're not natural to nature.
Mm,
And I remember hearing that
that's funny.
and think,
That's great.
oh,
Yeah,
so he only uses round
yeah.
because he said it's something you find in nature in
Yeah.
that way. But getting, and also starting from, it's a lot easier in a controlled environment
Yeah.
to start with no light, and then you strike the first one, and then you start adding and painting. You're basically painting with light. And I love that. But getting onto that, is there any fashion photographers that you look up to?
Oh, yeah. Well, I, I, there are. I mean, a lot of them are not with us anymore. I mean, the Guy Bourdin and Helmut
Mm,
Newton, Irving Penn, who I mentioned earlier, who I was, there's the term masterclass is a thing. It's like it's sort of tossed around
it
now.
is now.
But I still believe there's probably only been a handful that you would call master photographers, to this day. I even remember Richard Avedon in an interview.
I've got his book. It's
Yeah,
great.
in a Charlie Rose interview, said, and this is Avedon speaking, saying, if as a photographer you can die with 10 great pictures, you've done well. And he was talking about at that time talking about Cartier-Bresson, and he said, if you as a photographer, if you can die with 10 great pictures, you've done well. Cartier-Bresson's got hundreds, thousands. He was enamored, in awe of Cartier-Bresson.
What
So
is the moment? The
the
moment they click
decisive
the
moment,
decisive
yeah,
moment.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like the masters of fashion photography, for me are the Meisels and Stephen Meisel and Cartier-Bresson. Oh, sorry, not Cartier-Bresson.
Abaddon.
Avedon and Irving Penn and Guy Bourdin, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Americans. I loved for the guys that were sort of around that I was looking at in the 90s, like Mario Sorrenti, David Sims, Craig McDean, all brilliant. All sort of changed. They were there in the crucible of what was grunge, and then sort of turned into something
True.
else. And there's a bunch of really amazing photographers that I'm watching and learning from now. There's Tyler Mitchell, he's great. Harley Weir, who's out of London, and just some really great up and coming visionaries
Yeah.
that are sort of changing and celebrating, what is changing in fashion.
Sure.
And it's happening so fast, and it's so
Because fashion does change
yeah.
in a way, but that would reflect in photography too on how you take that.
But taking that a step further, now it's about engagement,
Mm.
and I cut my teeth in a time where, we were, it was all about the big picture. It was about the billboard that stayed up, or for 6 months, or it was about the campaign that ran for a season.
Sure.
Now you've got seconds to get someone's attention. So now the mastery has to come in understanding how to make the small picture work, because of the way we digest imagery and
Sure.
information. We're flicking our thumbs, and looking at stuff really quickly. The amount of information that we're having to digest every day, the way we're shopping, so the art of the small picture is the future in terms of photography. And I call it the small picture, because if it gets any bigger, it moves. So motion is such a huge part of
interesting.
our business now. So big screens are usually moving, as we can all see when we walk around the shopping malls or the streets. So that's where I think photography, or fashion photography, has changed and is changing. Like the volume of pictures that we have to create every day. We used to go into a job, if I was doing a campaign for one of the brands, we would be expected to produce 10 beautiful pictures in one day. Now we're up to 25.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
so because it's volume, it's the pure turnover of content that people need to be able to stay competitive. And I'm talking purely the commercial application of fashion photography.
Sure.
Obviously the magazines, you're still doing, you still have some creative license when you're working in magazines, and they expect you to bring something new to the table, and it's a little bit more crafted.
I'd love to hear that conversation with Leibowitz, Annie Lou. We need 25. I'm giving you 2.
Yeah, that's right. Right. So
I'm giving you 1 or 2.
Yeah, well, that's a different ball game again. That sort of idea of portraiture. I mean, even it's volume versus budget.
Yeah, sure.
The numbers have got to add up. And I think there's a certain level of experience you kind of have to come with to be able to pull it off. It's why people like myself are still, there's still plenty of work out there, because you can enter. There's sort of no barrier for entry now. With terms of digital imagery, you can get the tools that you need to make incredible digital content and digital imagery and get it out there. I had to get a portfolio together, get an airline ticket, get on a plane, and go and try and get my portfolio in front of someone, in whatever country I was in. That was an adventure in itself.
Yeah.
But with the ability to get that stuff out there so quickly now, and to build followings, and that's another.
It is, but there's a positive and a negative to that.
Yeah.
Like the negative is there's so much shit out there because it's so easy, and they're not taking their time to really think about the image. Back then, for someone like you to get a portfolio together, it takes a lot of dedication and risk to be able to then have to fly, show someone that portfolio, and you're thinking about that one image. It's like the guys who shoot weddings, you get the top guys that like Marcus Bell, and they'll charge 35 grand a wedding, but they won't machine gun the wedding. Like a new guy will just come on machine gun everything and pick those images, where those photographers understand the composition, where their voice is in this world, and they'll take these 30 photos that, majority. And I think there's a thing, even in film, there's a thing that's lost now where it's become so accessible to the days where, 16 shooting a film on 16 mil. I mean, it takes commitment because you need a lot of money to do it. But you had to think about it. We cut our first film on the old Steenbecks with sticky tape.
Yeah, right.
And, but to make that one cut, you really had to sit there and think, is
Yeah,
this where
right.
it's going to be? And I
Yeah.
think, I think
Wow.
I love that with even in photography, where in portraiture, uh, everything is done. They look at them, they look at the screen, they look at the adjust a few little lights and an f-stop here and that, and they just tweak. I love that though. But I was going to ask about equipment.
Oh, yeah. I look,
What equipment are you using now?
uh, I, it depends on what I'm doing. Well, one thing I have learnt is that there's not one camera that is perfect for everything, especially when it comes to the motion stuff that I do. But what is crucial are the optics, the lenses that
Yeah.
we have. So with the stills work that I do, I'll just use a regular SLR, sort of 46 megapixels or whatever they are, with usually prime lenses, and sort of build from there. I don't, cameras are an interesting thing. Again, there was a time where when you could buy, you buy a camera, and it was this thing that kind of became a part of you, and you could have the same camera for many years, and you're running film through it. But now it's like you've got to upgrade, otherwise you don't have the resolution. Or I think we're kind of almost tapped out in terms
I
of
think so.
like what we actually need. Now it's just all about responsivity and things like autofocus. I mean, some of the new autofocus mirrorless cameras that are out are just incredible. Like,
Fast.
I did a shoot recently where I literally had four people sort of running around in a room, and I was able to sort of pick out the person's face that I needed to track focus on, and
That's incredible,
I
hey?
didn't get a soft image. It was just amazing. Um, so that sort of stuff I think is really interesting. The in terms of the equipment that we use, but with motion work, it depends on the kind of camera moves that I want to try and achieve. I'm lucky enough to sort of have a DOP that sort of handles, what we need to build, whether it's a steady cam or whether it's something on a gimbal, or depending on what we need to do with it. But I'm pretty set on, having the optics that need to sort of sit in front of the box. That's the most important for me.
Right.
I am warming to the mirrorless systems, for that reason of,
Sure.
all the responsivity and all of that sort of stuff. But there is a sort of romantic side of what I enjoy when I look through the lens, and be able to see the moment that I'm trying to capture, or augment, the light, or I'm reading the shadows the way I want to read them. I'm not reading the shadows through an algorithm, which is what we do with mirrorless cameras, because we're actually looking at a screen through the viewfinder.
Yeah.
And for me, photography, and I've always I say this to my assistants. I really look at a photograph and judge it by its shadows and how beautiful the shadows are. Because I think that's where the depth is.
That's what I loved.
Yeah, yeah.
The shadows.
Yeah, and the site, are they soft? Are they hard? Are they open? Are they, is there a little bit of tone going through the shadows?
Sure.
It's like, and you often find that with the new mirrorless cameras, I just can't get my head around. It'll come, just a matter of retraining. But I do love looking through an incredible piece of glass, especially if I'm looking at, looking through like a Cook optic, beautiful, you know, something that's just fabulous. And
What is your favorite lens? What do you find yourself drawn to a bit more?
I like, I do tend to shoot wider than longer. Um, but having said that, I love, my current go-to lens is a 35 millimeter Sigma Art series lens that goes on by Nikon. There's just something really immediate about that perspective. It's just got a really nice sort of sense of space. It's how I'm seeing things at the minute.
Yeah.
Um,
35's nice.
yeah,
These are 35s.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But then I love the bokeh of a 300 mil,
Yeah.
you know, um, you know, wide open thing, where I might be shooting a beautiful, beauty campaign or something where I need to isolate the subject
Sure.
and just have some really beautiful colors and sort of light play in the background. But, and they're pretty hard to beat. I always, I just get so disappointed when I see things artificially softened in the background.
Yeah.
It just never looks right.
It doesn't. But do
Um,
you think it will get there with
yeah, 100%.
software?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think everything's going to get somewhere, and it'll get there.
So
You know.
you can focus like post focus.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Well, you can do that now.
yeah, you
Yeah,
can.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I know there's apps that can do
Yeah,
it, but I don't know
yeah,
about.
yeah. It's becoming more and more about gathering the raw data and then piecing it together.
Right.
Um, uh, and whether that gets us to the next stage of where we are, with real people, as opposed to what is coming, in terms of all the stuff that I've been seeing around, metaverse technologies and, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, do you know, I've never thought of it until now.
Yeah.
Like, how is the photography industry going to change with all of that? I've never thought about it
Yeah.
until you've just said,
Yeah.
oh, with the new metaverse and
Yeah. Look, I think that I think I've been speaking to, I've sort of started to have a look at all of that, and I I'm really blown away by some of the tests that I've been seeing in terms of the way skin is being rendered. You know, a lot of the software that I've been looking at, and it's getting pretty good. Like, it's I've seen some. There's still a sort of lifelessness to a lot of the 3D rendering that I'm seeing,
right.
but it's getting pretty good pretty quickly. Um, it's expensive, but
Yeah.
so was the first, digital camera that I used was in 2002, and it was a 4 megapixel back, and it was $20,000.
Yeah.
Giving that some context, an iPhone is, I think, about 12 megapixels now, maybe even more.
Mm,
And it's more. I think it's 20 or something. I don't know, but there's just the exponential progress that is being made in imaging. It's just,
especially with sensors.
yeah, is unbelievable. And I think it's really exciting. Like, because it's just another thing. It's just another medium.
That's right.
And I look at the way the information and images are being digested by people, like the way we're getting the information, the way we're dealing with the information, and the amount of information that we're getting. It's hard to you can't sort of turn your back on,
No.
on what's coming. Um, but having said that, the one piece of kit that I have pulled out and which I'm absolutely loving right now is my Yashica T4. It's a 35mm point shoot, which I really love using. I started using it back in about 1998, and it's in mint condition, and I still put rolls of film through it every day. It's got a Carl Zeiss lens, and I'm back in the darkroom, printing pictures again. So there's all of this stuff at our disposal.
They're tools, isn't it, for an
and just
artist?
to make images, and any way you want to do it. And some days I feel like going out, just making some pictures with my digital cameras, or taking, sometimes I'll just do it with my, my phone. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It just, there's so many ways to do it, and but it's, because so long as you're sort of true to your point of view, it doesn't matter
I think
what
so.
it is. It really doesn't.
People get so caught up in all of that.
So many, and
Mm.
that everyone sort of likes to really get caught up in the way they make the image, with what they use. And it's, doesn't, it's kind of, it matters, but it doesn't
It
matter,
does,
if
yeah.
that makes sense.
Do you know, I was listening to these futurists talking about different industries. They actually came to the education, through the education system.
Yeah.
You know, also talking about what people are studying now. There's going to be no jobs for that in 5 years. So,
Yeah.
and there's so much. But, you know, it reminded me of carpentry. And they said, you know, carpentry for things like commercial manufacturing, it's going to be done through, you know, computers and robots.
Mm.
However, people will pay thousands of dollars for that one table that has defects in it, that was handmade. You know, it's like people going back to the records. So it's not that digital crisp thing. And I think with photography, you know, you'll have such perfect images. And I think, you know, in the future, like, you know, the supermodels we grew up with, Cindy Crawford, Claudia, you know, Claudia Schiffer, you'd be able to buy a license, say Cindy Crawford. I don't know the models today, but say Cindy Crawford, you could license her image, which will be in a computer, but you'll have that license for whatever shoot you've got. So you're still paying the thousands of dollars.
It's called an NFT.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, you shoot on the location, you go to location, digitally Cindy Crawford comes there. You'll pose however you want, and then it'll be done.
Yeah.
But yet someone like, you know, we're going to pay you more to take this old camera from the 80s and 90s with an old Carl Zeiss lens and go out and shoot somebody, and then that image, you know, there's meaning and a worth behind that image.
You know, Wayne, it's amazing that you just said that, because I was on a shoot the other day and I had that exact thought, in the sense that I was shooting someone and I'd had this conversation about, you know, the metaverse and, you know, lighting. Actually, was a lighting discussion about how to sort of light a specific project. And I was on, and I've spent a lot of my life looking through into a sort of rectangle, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes I get lost in my own thoughts.
I love it.
And, you know, because often it's, you know, even though there's 30 people around, you know, once you put the camera to your eye, you they all go away. You know, it's like, it's just what I'm seeing through the lens. And I'll have thoughts. And I was having this wonderful, I was on this wonderful shoot. I was shooting with some really great people. And I had this thought, I'm like, one day shooting real people on a real location is going to be a luxury.
Yeah.
You know, I had this thing of like, this is going to be something that's like painting, or like, you know, like this thing that we almost have to preserve the process of it, because you can, you know, it's knocking.
Like in the film. Look at film now.
Yeah, like film now. Exactly. And, you know, I think whatever the advances are, well, you can take a couple of views on it, but I think if you don't celebrate it and welcome them and learn about them, and if you're not curious about them, you won't, I don't think you'll necessarily enjoy what's coming. You know? And I think there's a certain sort of amount of surrender you have to have around.
I think you do, because it is coming.
Yeah.
But I think it's another tool. You still need Simon's eye.
Well, for now. We'll see, you know, like maybe that's an algorithm that we can create somewhere down the track. But like, I really did. I had this thought. I thought, wow, you know, this is a really special time. And it's like when, like, the transition from film to digital. Like, I'm really lucky to have had this the career so far that that has spanned such change. You know,
we've lived in a good time.
Yeah. And it's just been really, you know. And I like to see, you know, now that I've got a teenage daughter as well, you know, I'm seeing the way she's viewing the world, and the way she, you know, like I was asking her what she was doing the other day, and she's like, oh, I'm backstage at Dua Lipa. I'm like, what are you talking about? She was on, you know, she was in the metaverse at some Dua Lipa concert. And I'm like,
really?
You know, yeah. And it was, but, you know, it was not an animation. It was a rendering of,
yeah,
you know,
sure,
whatever it was, Roblox or whatever she was playing. But that's kind of what it's like. And it was really interesting, because, you know, it's, you know, from the commercial side of things, it's gaming and Web3, you know, it's sort of gaming and everything else all coming into gaming and shopping, and everything's kind of meeting in this place. And what we do as image makers in that, on the commercial side of things, what we do in that fashion space is curating that experience, that fashion experience, that idea of shopping or whatever it might be, just sort of simplified in that way. That's what it is now.
Yeah.
It's like, and I think that it's like any cultural shift. It goes one way really quickly, and then it bounces back, and it somehow sort of settles in the middle, or settles somewhere. It just finds its equilibrium. And I think we're sort of in that sort of period of flux. And I think eventually there will be a really nice equilibrium where we'll be able to experience it all.
Yeah, it's like when we moved to phones to start taking photos.
Yeah, or mobile phones.
Yeah,
it was like this idea of like privacy, and
yeah,
and now it's like you talk to anyone who, and I still think about it now. It's like, how did my mum and dad let me go and do these things without even not being able to contact me, and just trusting that I would be where I said I would be at like a certain time so they could pick me up? I mean, it was just this amazing thing,
I know. I remember hitchhiking,
yeah,
going to the rollerdrome,
yeah.
and just thinking,
in Morley,
in Morley, and just thinking, God, can you imagine now?
Yeah,
like parents are dropping their kids like 5 blocks down to school in a car.
Yeah.
I'm like, what happened to the? So I don't know. Like people saying it's more dangerous now. I don't think so.
No,
I think you've got things you've got to be wary of, like drugs and stuff. I mean, the drugs we had at school was the most was like marijuana.
Yeah.
But you could do those things. Like you'd meet up with your friends. A good day was seeing all the BMX bikes on your lawn because you knew all your friends were over.
Yeah.
But if it came down to playing Atari and going out with your friends, you'd always go out with your friends. That's changed.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
now you can play Atari with your friends and not even be together.
Yeah. And but there is something that's lost there.
Yeah. Oh,
verbal communication.
Yeah. Well, I was saying, when we wanted to call someone and ask them out, when we were kids, you had to call the house, and you might get the brother, you might get the sister, you get the mum or the dad, and you had to sort of, work it a little bit and understand what you're going to say to each person. And that sort of made connections in the way you would be able to communicate. It sort of taught us how to communicate.
It taught a lot.
And now they're sort of slipping straight into the DMs and they're bypassing that whole kind of
fear of rejection.
Yeah. And I think that there's definitely, there's a different way of communicating amongst, that group of people now, in terms of the way sort of we did at the same age, but it's just another way of communicating now. Everything's changing, whether it's better or worse. I'm sure we would have found our parents' parents would have probably said the same thing about us.
Them. Yeah, that's the way it's going to go. Do you know, there was something that's come to my mind now, and I thought it's just me being a beginner and a noob when I started photography. But, there were people that were absolutely stunning to look at. But the minute they got in front of my lens, I couldn't capture that beauty of when I was just looking at them. And I would tweak the lights and I would change the lens, and I had a nightmare. There's one guy and one girl that I've shot that I just could not capture the beauty of me just seeing them through the camera, and vice versa. Like a model that you would see as a model, but the minute they shine in front of the lens, you've got that. I suppose with models you get that all the time, but have you had it the other way? Does that happen to a pro like you, where you don't have to mention names, but is there a model that you see and you're like, wow, and she comes in front of, or he comes in front of the camera and you just can't capture that masculinity, sex charm, or woman,
Yeah, look, I hear what you're saying.
I don't know if it just happens to me or
I think a lot of it does come down to what's happening, the environment as well. It might be a light thing. It might be a perspective thing. It might be, but it's a hard one to quantify. It does happen.
I don't know how I don't know. Like,
I would say in my experience, though, it's been the reverse. Like I'll often,
mm,
I'm and it happens a lot it's happened a lot with me with a lot of the times where I've shot celebrities, where, I'm like, okay. And then eventually, and it's not even a hair and makeup thing. It's just the performance, their ability to
sure.
sort of, whatever it is that puts them, in front of, that, that's created their career, the way the way they glow in a
Yeah.
certain way, the minute they're sort of, it's time for them to
Does one
perform.
particular model come to mind, as in one that you look back on and go, "Phew, that was."
Look, I do remember, when I tell that story, and I think she's incredibly beautiful and talented. But I remember going to Hollywood and shooting Kirsten Dunst once for a cover of a magazine. I mean, it's happened a lot, but with this in particular, I just remember, because I didn't really know that much about it. But I mean, I knew a bit about it, but I didn't really
Sure.
have a detailed understanding of what she was up to at the time, or where she had been. She had a bit of a hiatus, and she was coming back into a film project that we were shooting her for. But um, I remember her sort of turning up, and I didn't recognize her. She was still beautiful. She just had a different type
Yeah.
of energy. But the minute sort of she got in front of the camera, there was this like this essence that had just kind of, that didn't exist until, well, in my view of things, didn't exist until she got in front of the camera. And then as soon as that happened, it was like she was sort of um harnessing something that that was very natural to her. um and that was amazing, because that
Fantastic.
really did feel like I was capturing something quite special.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's why a lot of people in her position, yeah, I remember, um, meeting Nicole Kidman once, and I haven't photographed Nicole Kidman, but I have met her, and I just remember standing next to her and thinking she's just glowing. Like there was just this thing about her.
Essence.
There was just this, yeah, and I see that quite a lot, and even just in my daily life, when I meet people, I can see that some people just have that. We all see it. There's this certain thing,
Like an aura, like a
like an aura,
energy.
yeah, like an energy in search of form. It's just
Yes.
it's just there, and it's just like, and that excites me when I like, that's something I find very interesting, and I think that's one of the things that draws me to shooting people, and
Sure.
why I'm a people photographer as
Sure.
opposed to a landscape photographer, or a still life photographer. I appreciate all those wonderful things, and I shoot both of those things, but people just are everything. Like
Mm,
the experience of being around people and having the opportunity to work and shoot
yeah.
talented people, interesting
Because you
people. I
shot
think
Kate Bosworth too, didn't you?
I did. Yeah,
Because
yeah,
she's got two different
yeah.
coloured
That's
eyes.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I did. You know, before we all got locked down, and the world shut down, etc. Traveling was still quite a big part of my life, um, for work, that is. So I'm looking forward to maybe sort of re-engaging with the rest of the world
Yeah.
this year. Getting back out
That's what I was
there.
going to ask you.
Yeah.
Mm,
So because I love I love being in Australia, and I love making pictures here, but that curiosity gene, it's still, like I said, hasn't gone away. It's like I still have this idea of have camera will travel. That's
yeah.
really,
We've
that's,
got such harsh light here too
yeah,
in Australia. I remember going to South Africa and the light there is beautiful. And
yeah,
it's this golden brown,
yeah,
where it's very harsh here. And most of our car commercials done in the 90s were shot in Cape Town.
right, yes. Well, and a lot of the stills campaigns were done there too.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Mm,
they shoot for for cars.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a big industry over
So, I mean, I was going to ask you about that. But what has been your favorite location that you've shot at that you can think about?
Well, I would say two come to mind. I would say Greece. I was lucky enough very early on in my career. One of my first sort of overseas paid trips as a photographer was a trip to Greece. From Australia for it was actually for Dolly magazine back in the day.
I remember that.
Yeah, I was very young, and there was a whole bunch of us went away and from Australia and got on a plane, and off we went to shoot some pictures, and it was just magical. I shot there a few times now, but it just from a light perspective, from a graphics perspective,
Right.
everything that I love about composing a picture, um, and the spirit of what I love in pictures happens in Greece, and maybe that's something that's sort of stuck around since I
Yeah,
was 11. It's
true.
something
Could be.
etched in there. But
Could be.
the other place that I really loved, which I've been to a couple of times, is the Maldives. I went
Oh,
there. I
wow.
mean, it just lends itself to that kind of graphic nature. But in terms of places that I mean, anywhere that I've been in Australia where I've shot in deserts, and that's it's just
Yeah,
every place has its kind of charm,
sure.
and Broken Hill was great too. I went out there a year or so ago, and that was fab. But the other place that really kind of became a favorite for me was Mexico. Um,
Right.
I went to Mexico. It was one of the last travel jobs I was able to do before when we stopped traveling. I ended up in Sayulita, Mexico, for a few days shooting a campaign over there. And that was just magic. The light was great. The people were fantastic.
I love
Yeah,
Mexicans.
yeah. Oh, it was so good. And I think I'm quite keen to get back there. Um, uh, if not for a job, for a holiday,
Yeah.
just to go back and not have to stress about the weather or the tides or the
Actually,
clouds.
does that? I'm coming up to 20 sec. Does that happen when you are just not on a job, but you're like, is this like going to last?
Oh,
Is this weather going to? Is this weather going
well, it does, but it also happens both ways. So sometimes I'll be on a job and I'll be like, I wish I was on holidays, and then sometimes I'll be on a holiday thinking, geez, I wish we were shooting in this light. It's like,
I bet.
so it happens. It happens both ways. But yeah,
You can never turn off.
no, you
You
can't.
can
I
never
mean,
turn off.
no,
It's like a chef, when he goes out for dinner,
yeah,
they're always looking at the food.
yeah, and it's also the nature of freelancing too, because like you can never. I mean, I've missed one of the things about freelancing as well, is that you've got to take the work when you can get it,
Yeah,
or when it comes to you, and
sure.
it's very hard to sort of say, no, I can't do that job that day because of and I over the period of my life, it's like I've missed out on friends' weddings, I've missed out on all sorts of things because something will come in and it's been something that
I
you've been
understand that.
chasing for a really long time, and then all of a sudden it's like, and I'll often say to my assistants or my friends, in the industry who are getting started, I'm like, if you ever feel like your career's over and no one's ever going to book you again, book a holiday. Because the next thing that will happen, that you'll get a phone call, then it'll be a job right in the middle of that time, and it's true. It's
Yeah,
exactly how it works. It's like, you can't switch off. But what you can do over a period of time is have more confidence that those people who want to book you now will probably want to book you again in 3 weeks' time or next month or whatever, because otherwise your life just gets away from
yeah.
and you're like, you just become defined by your work schedule or whatever it might be, and
How,
it's all great, but you definitely have to be able to sort of take some time out for yourself, and even if it's just to reset and recalibrate the eyes or the way you're thinking about
true,
something.
true. How did you survive COVID? Actually,
Good question.
especially being a photographer, freelancer, like,
Yeah, so what we did, it was very interesting, because it was a really busy. I mean, it's been getting busier.
Sure.
Basically, the number, there's never been a greater need or desire for imagery in the world, in the history of the world, when you think about it. Like the amount of content that people need, and with all the different platforms and everything that's out there, there's people just need pictures and videos. Like it's just crazy. So, the content in general. So it's been getting progressively busier. I'd say the last 3 or 4 years, and you've really seen or the last 6 years, really, you've seen a real exponential increase in the number of just the sheer volume of content people require. So when COVID hit, um, there was everyone experienced that uncertainty, but we were right in the middle of a big season of work, or getting started with it anyway. I was staring down the barrel of about 4 months worth of work.
Wow.
Just sitting there. And then the lockdown happened and all of that, and no one really knew what was going on. But there was people still needed to be able to get stuff done, and so we were able to sort of start Zooming. So we were shooting remotely.
Really?
Yeah. So when it sort of came down to it, and a lot of my clients, for instance, in Melbourne, even though they couldn't physically be at the shoot, we were able to set up remote protocols where they could actually see the shoot in real time as it happened, while we were shooting in studios in Sydney with a sort of skeleton crew.
Wow.
And that sort of,
Interesting.
that became and has become pretty much an industry standard now. Like there's often, you'll have I mean, just recently, even with a shoot here, my creative director was in the Southern Highlands. Oh, actually he was in Sydney. You know, just because you can do it now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't always have to, and it helps people sort of not have to, who can't particularly travel, or it's not a good week to travel or whatever, they can still be across the shoot. So yeah, we were shooting remotely and still continue to some extent even now. But there was that time where it just shut down completely, and it was a really interesting time. I sort of worked on a few little projects. I did a couple of little made a couple of little animations at home. It was in Sydney, especially. Melbourne had the longest lockdown in that particular year. But in those early days where the whole country was sort of shut down, I guess it was, what was it, February, March of 2020, I sort of started experimenting with sort of animations and doing all the crazy little things at home.
Because you're creative at heart.
Yeah.
You're still being creative.
You couldn't leave the house, like literally, like you could only leave the house to go and exercise for 1 hour.
Where are you in Sydney?
I'm in Bondi Junction.
Oh, nice.
It's right near Centennial Park there. So it's lovely. But yeah, you literally couldn't leave the house. So eventually when we were sort of able to go out, and walk around for essential services or essential items, I was doing, I would walk around with my camera and shooting just quiet street, like
Isn't
Oxford
it
Street at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Can you imagine?
I've got pictures of it completely empty.
Wow.
And I look back, and at the time it didn't seem like a big deal. But now I look at these pictures of empty streets and taped off, playgrounds and swings tied together so kids couldn't swing, like all of that sort of stuff. Those pictures are so like,
suddenly every city became like a Chernobyl.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And everybody's experience, although overarching, seemed similar. When you sort of drill down, everybody kind of dealt with it in a very different way.
Yeah.
And I would say that even now, not having, I was saying to someone the other day, not being able to come to Perth or even have the option to come and see my family, and knowing that I was it really was quite, it's like, wow, like they're all over there and I'm here and I want to go over there. And it was just it was really tough because as I said, that pull, that Perth thing. it's still there, you know.
Damn
It's
it.
like, and you know, I'll often feel like I know when I haven't been back to Perth for a long time. I can feel it, you know. I know when I need to
Sure,
get back there and touch base, or back here and
sure.
touch base. And you know, I hope it never goes away. You know, like I
I don't
love,
think it does,
you know,
Simon.
no,
Mm.
and after, after 30 years, I mean, well, if it was going to go away, it
It
would
would have
have.
gone.
Yeah, but you know, and I was actually on on a boat coming back from Rottnest yesterday on a job, and one of the talent that we were working with had never seen the sunset on the ocean before. She'd never been to the West Coast, or the West, you know, she'd never seen the sunset
Interesting,
hit the
hey?
sea. And
Because you don't
she
hear
was
about.
literally, we were coming through, you know, coming across at sunset. You know, we were right there in Gage Roads. The container ships was just beautiful things. And, you know, everything was happening. And she was crying. And I'm like, what's going on? Are you okay? And she goes, I've never seen this before. I've never seen the sun hit the ocean. And I'm like, and I took a picture of her. It was amazing. I thought, do you want me to take a picture so you can remember? She goes, yeah, absolutely. And she was beautifully lit, and it was just an amazing picture. But she, you know, and I forgot, you know, I remember when I was all guns blazing when I was 23, when I was leaving to go, you know, to pursue start the journey. And I got to Sydney, and I kind of totally slipped my mind. And, you know, it was day
Sunrise.
3. I'm like, oh, that's right. I'm not going to see the sunset on the
Yeah.
ocean anymore. You know, they don't play footy here. They,
But you also see sunrise there,
yes,
you
we
know.
do. Yeah, that's true. But yeah,
Isn't that funny?
yeah.
And you know, when you took the picture of it just reminded me of something I was going to ask you. Model posing. How did you learn that?
Oh, look, I think, you know, there's, I don't know if I have ever learnt that, because I'm constantly trying to get them not to pose.
Okay.
Um, I'm trying to sort of stay true as I can to the person. So in terms of when I cast for a particular project, I'll often be casting for the way someone can sort of um, authentically exist within the frame. You know, the minute something starts to
Realism.
get really posed, or it's realism, but it's also sort of a relaxed optimism is what I'm tending to look for
That's nice.
in the people that I work with, um, and a spirit. So often, you know, if it starts to get too posy,
Sure.
I've lost the picture.
Oh, okay.
So,
Interesting.
so I don't tend to sort of stick to sort of. I mean, there are certain, but you know, certain models that you work with also know themselves very well,
Sure.
and what you know, some models that I work with, you know themselves so well. They'll walk onto set and they'll look at a lighting setup and they'll just say, "Nah, it's not going to work." You know,
They
like,
know.
you
Yeah.
know, or you know, and then it'll be a bit of a to and a fro, and
Yeah.
I'll, you know, but they just know.
It's like actors.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
really
exactly.
experienced actors
Yeah,
know the lighting setups and know which light is their light,
yeah,
where they look the
yeah,
best. You
yeah,
know, it's
yeah,
that
yeah.
experience.
So you know, just to get back to your question about posing, it's you know, over the years, you kind of, I know what um each brief is slightly different as well, you know, like,
Mm,
you know, depending on, you know, how we're lensing the job, you know, where are my angles,
sure.
what are we doing with this series of pictures. But most of the time with my pictures, it's I'm looking for a nice spirit, more so than I am looking for a pose, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I suppose it comes naturally now in
yeah,
that moment that you're on set. It
yeah.
happens organic. It's an organic process, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, often you'll just, you know, often you'll, and each sort of era has a sort of different type of
Sure.
family of poses, you know, the 90s was all about people just sort of standing there and looking really kind of nonchalant about world around them.
Yeah.
The
Like,
a
did you know Rankin?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
This sort of punk,
yeah. That's
rock
right.
star of the
Yeah,
photography.
yeah. And then you had the '80s, which was a lot more glamorous, and there was, and you go back through the decades. The '50s was sort of the quintessential posing. The
Yeah.
arms, the hand on the hip, and all of that sort of stuff. And there was, because it was all coming out of the way, um, at the time, or in those times of what the fashion was doing,
Yeah.
how the fashion was tailored, and how it looked best in certain angles. Yeah, that's sort of the way it sort of works,
Yeah,
really.
true.
It's the fashion that sort of that dictates what
Sure.
positions of the body
But your
look
style
best.
would lend a lot to like street photography too.
Yeah.
Do you like street?
Well, yeah, mate, I started my first gig was shooting the big day out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was shooting event, like when I say events, I was observing things like the big day out and rodeos and stuff like that. And I would just sort of turn up with my camera and just sort of cruise around and
Yeah.
and shoot,
Yeah.
and also very early on, I think, when I first thought about the idea of maybe being a career photographer of some kind, photojournalism was something that was really interesting to me. I wanted to write
Yeah.
and shoot. Um, and so the observational type of photography that I was shooting back then was really good. And I'm sort of almost going back there a little bit, even with some of the ways that I'm thinking about some of the fashion projects that I've got coming up, of lending that sort of, like, you look at the Bruce Davidson Subway series. I don't know if you're
I do.
familiar,
Yeah.
Bruce. That sort of observation.
Mm.
The relationship of the 28 mm lens with
I
just,
love that. Eh?
and I would look at Gary Winogrand
Yeah.
and Robert Frank and all of that sort of stuff back then. Cartier-Bresson, of course, you
Yeah.
mentioned
I used
earlier.
to love those. There was I think Robert Drosnew.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
used to love his work, and even Gordon Parks, who eventually became a director.
Yeah.
But I loved his work in, those I think it was 50s Black America,
Yeah, yeah.
60s Black
Amazing.
America with
Yeah.
Ali even.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love that
Yeah.
sort of stuff.
So that's kind of when I, started to hone in on photography as a thing. That's where I started. I
Okay.
started with Gary Winogrand and Robert Frank. I started, reading books like,
Robert Frank's great.
yeah, and then I would sort of take reference and say, okay, I'm going to read on the road. I'm going to go out and shoot some pictures that look like the book that
Yeah,
I've just
true.
read.
True.
So I would go out and sort of get into that. It would sort of, because those books would take me to a certain place in my mind. The pictures would just sort of start to come.
Yeah.
And, so I would go out and buy a roll of, 400 Tri-X and push it 3 stops and just walk around Perth at night taking pictures of lights and
Great.
people on the street. And I would look, and I would go into the university dark room and print them. And I'm like, here's 1950s America. But it's actually,
there's a sense of therapy that comes with that, don't you reckon?
yeah,
It's meditative. It's like a meditation.
yeah.
Like I started doing that recently, just going out since I moved here, going out into Perth at night, just with one of these
It's so
cameras,
good.
and just listening to music
Yeah.
and taking photos. It's just such
Yeah.
good therapy
Yeah.
in that way. Last but not least, if a young photographer came to you, Simon, what are some of the magical lessons that you've learned that you can impart to make their journey a little bit easier?
Good question. Look, I would say that trust your point of view. Really, really, even though that's sort of like a bit sort of out there in terms of talking to someone who's just picked up a camera, but trying to find the confidence to actually understand that the way you see the world, no one else has the same fingerprint. That's it. Like, and that's definitely something that that was something that was told to me very early on, and it must be an unwavering thing. You've got to really, you've really got to understand what your point of view is, and it does change, but you know checking in on that through your photography is important, you know. I think that getting hands-on skills within the industry that you want to be in, there's no point in going to assist a fashion photographer if you want to shoot architecture. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's just because what comes out of that process, and this is my last point in terms of what I think is the most important thing in this business, is relationships. You know, celebrating the relationships that you create through the creative process and holding them really dear, because they're hard to find, the really special ones, you know, that you have with people that I've worked with, you know, some people I've worked with since I started, you know, and we still work together. And there's, you know, you can learn about light, you can learn about cameras, you can learn about all that stuff, but it's like we were saying earlier, it's the relationships, the people, that's what makes a great career.
Yeah.
Is getting involved with people who want to make pictures. Yeah, that's
so
it.
true.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
And if people want to look at what's up and coming for Simon, where can they find you?
Oh, well,
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, look, I mean, I've at the moment I'm sort of working on some pretty full-on commercial projects. I don't have any sort of personal stuff scheduled, or as in exhibitions or anything scheduled for this year. But next year, I'm looking at putting together a big 30-year sort of, don't want to really call it a retrospective, but it's more just a visual diary of the journey so far, and that's going to be happening. I'm sort of editing that right now, and I'm back in the darkroom, so I'm going to be doing all that. But you know, I mean, the usual channels: Instagram, just my name, and
say your name for the listeners.
Simon Lekias. Yeah,
Simon Lekias. Yeah,
and yeah, so that's where I'm at a lot of the times, and websites
Instagram
and stuff. Instagram, website,
okay.
simonlekias.com. Yeah, you know, it's sort of out there and floating around.
Mate, it's been a pleasure having a chat with you. And
thanks, Wayne.
Yeah, no, it's great to get an insight
Yeah.
into an industry that I love.
Yeah.
And taking photos is just something magical about it.
Yeah.
And to actually talk to someone that's doing it for the last 30 years and getting their insight on it and still feeling that passion that comes from, it's almost spiritual. It's like that essence that you look for, you know, and you still got the curiosity. It's just, it's good to hear, but it's been a pleasure. And thanks for coming on. I know you're a really busy man.
No, but absolutely my pleasure. And I'm so happy to have met you. And it's been a really, really, really lovely conversation.
And I'm hoping you walk away going, is that what I do?
No, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. You know, you've given me some pearls today. So thanks very much.
No, it's mutual, mate. Mutual. Thanks, brother.
Cheers, mate.